Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and it is time for another record collection update. Let's fucking go. Okay, this is a review of all of the records that I have added to my collection over the past, like 2 months, I think, give or take. This will probably be the last update video that I do in the year 2024 because you can't see the huge stack that's right next to me, but we've acquired a lot of records recently, and I probably should not acquire too many more before the year is all said and done. Having said that, part of the reason why there's such a huge stack here and why I haven't split this video up over time is because a lot of these were just kind of coming in like over a period of time as like online purchases. I was also out of town for a decent bit of the month of October, out of state actually. So a lot of this has just kind of been accrued over time, and it's just been a matter of literally finding the time to spend an hour or however long to talk about these records. So yeah, I mean, we probably have like 30 of these, give or take. I'm just eyeballing it here. I haven't counted them. And they're also not, the order they're in is really kind of in purchase order. So there are going to be some artists and some bands who are kind of dispersed throughout this whole collection. So, no particular rhyme or reason for anything, but we do have one, album in particular that I think is going to be very relevant and very interesting for, fans of new music, fans of, the number one rated Rate Your Music album of the year 2024. I think it's number one. Maybe it's number two now. I can't remember. But Magdalena Bay fans, you might want to stay until, I guess not the end, more like the middle. Anyways, this has been a great opening pitch. Let's start talking about records. I'll try not to get too into the weeds of talking about any of these either, just because we have so much to get through. But here we go. Okay, so this first one is actually kind of, it's funny because I've actually had this for a long time, and I haven't shown this in any of my videos because I essentially got this for somebody else, not realizing that they had just gotten it, they just purchased it themselves. So I was like, well, shit, do I just like return this because I already own this on vinyl, but also the copy I own on vinyl is kind of beat up because it's in a OG pressing or close to it. So I decided to keep it, and that of course is Led Zeppelin 4. What can you say? It's probably the best Zeppelin record, and I appreciate having a copy of it because I played my older copy of it. It's pretty tattered. There's some nicks and scratches on it, so I think that might end up becoming a display copy. I'm still trying to figure out how I want to kind of organize my record display. You can kind of see right behind me here is the copy of Bon Iver's 22 a Million. That's in kind of one of those like really cheap frames you can get for like $8 to $10 a pop if you buy them in bulk. They're very cheap, and if you're trying to frame anything that isn't a single LP, which I try to do fairly frequently, unfortunately, those things they wear off and they fall out. So I'm trying to find a better way of displaying records. If you have any recommendations for how to display them, I am indeed all ears. Okay, the next three here are all Leonard Cohen records. I picked them up in a lot of three. Because while I owned one of them already, I didn't own the other two. And these two they're not hard to find, but usually you're paying probably about $25 to $30 a pop for each of them. So to get them all in a lot together for, I think it was like $45 was excellent. I was really happy about that. So it's the last three that he released while he was alive. So we're going to start with Old Ideas. As you can see, there's original Shrink here, original hype stickers and everything like that here. I'm very partial to these albums. They're not, apart from You Want It Darker, which I'll show in a minute, I don't necessarily think they're like high watermarks of his career per se, but I do think that there's something to be said, especially for their kind of more stripped back approach, the kind of more intimate production. You know, a lot of the production work is done by either Leonard himself or like his son. And so you'll hear people talk about records like this one, or especially Popular Problems, where the production is said to be cheap. And I understand that critique, people saying that it sounds like they use like GarageBand beats and stuff like that. I understand that critique, but I think there is a certain level of charm to it. And especially considering, you know, the reason why we have more Leonard Cohen music was because of the tour that he only went under because he was, you know, borderline bankrupt, for reasons that were not his fault. I'm just, you know, honestly, like, I'm just more grateful than anything that Dear Heather was not the last record, because Dear Heather, I think, is a not bad, but a slog, I think. Pretty underwhelming. Here's Popular Problems. Also, the cover art for this one just makes me laugh. It's very, I don't know, it pops out. It pops out in a way that has a sort of unique charm to it. So I'm happy to own both of those. And then You Want It Darker, which I already owned. I bought this a couple months or so after it came out. But again, thinking about like display copies and things like that. I mean, this is, if it's not my favorite Leonard Cohen record, it's the Leonard Cohen record that means the most to me because it was the first one I heard. So, again, having a copy that is for playing and a copy that's for display, I'm always very partial to that. I'm hoping to start doing that a little bit more, start investing in those things. Okay. In my previous video, I think it was, I talked about how I invested in a Julian Baker record on vinyl, Turn Out the Bright Lights. And so I found this record in a used store at a half price book specifically. Her most recent one, Little Oblivions, most recent as of this video. Yeah, I don't know. Again, Julian is someone where I struggle to kind of convey which records I enjoy more than others, because I think ultimately I enjoy all three of her projects at about the same degree. I think there are times when I prefer the earlier stuff a little bit more, but I think this one, and really her catalog in general, I think this record especially was underrated. I think when it came out, I think people, especially with, you know, the emergence of the other kind of Boy Genius members, I'm not saying that people in 2021 were thinking of Julian Baker purely as the person from Boy Genius, because I don't think Boy Genius had the same cultural capital that it does now. But I do think that at the time, I mean, Phoebe Bridgers was coming off a major album in Punisher. Lucy Dacus was putting out more critically well-received projects, that I think people were expecting this quote-unquote huge step forward from Julian, and I don't think people believe that's what they got with this record. And I don't necessarily know that I would say that either, but I think it's really consistent quality. I like the sound of this album, and yeah, some of the tracks like Relative Fiction, Crying Wolf, Zip Tie. There's some really strong stuff here. So I like Julian a lot. I'm pretty sure I feel like I've heard she's been in the studio lately. So I'm interested to hear the next kind of solo projects from the Boy Genius members, because it's definitely been a quiet period from them since they dominated so much of indie and alternative discourse last year. A couple records that I found at a discounted price from a Barnes & Noble. This is Neil Young and Crazy Horse. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere. I think this is my first Neil Young record, actually. You know, I have not done a Neil Young deep dive. He's probably one of the most prominent of the classic artists who I have not heard the complete discography of. I've only heard a few select albums. So, you know, I can't speak with any sort of authority on his career, apart from obviously this was extremely early on, first record with Crazy Horse. And, you know, after the Gold Rush is really the album that made Neil Young who he was. That was the commercial breakthrough. But this is the record, like, if you want to talk about Young as a songwriter, as a just kind of pure force of nature, and as someone who was unique in that period, something that I think was harder to be than maybe people realize. You know, this record has it. I mean, almost every song on here has become a sort of Americana country folk standard on some level. Cinnamon Girl, title track, Down by the River, Cowgirl in the Sand. I mean, yeah, there's so much quality stuff here. I don't know. I think if you were to ask me what my favorite Young record is right now, I'd probably say After the Gold Rush and be fairly boring about it. But I do think this one is kind of a close second. It has been a while since I've heard his stuff, so that might just be the motivation I need to listen to all 40-something of his records, or however many there are. Emmylou Harris, Wrecking Ball. I recently listened to this for the first time a few months ago. And, you know, it's a collection of Emmylou sort of reinterpreting all these other notable songs. It came out in, was it 95, I think. And, you know, this is, you know, for the one, I think this is one of those classic examples of an Americana folk roots artist not necessarily reinventing themselves per se. I don't think this is stylistically that far of a diversion from what Emmylou was doing in general, but making a statement by stripping their music down to its essence, and critically, I think, doing that by working with a producer who can take that sound and channel it into something. And of course, you know, I'm talking about Daniel Lanois here. Lanois, of course, you know, worked with a bunch of people. And I think a lot of people kind of call this Emmylou's, you know, version of like Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind or something like that. And, you know, I don't agree necessarily with that, but I do, you know, because I think they're coming from two very different artistic places. And I don't think Emmylou is reflecting on mortality as obviously here as Dylan is on Time Out of Mind. But I do think there is a certain, like, you can hear the uniformity in the sound, and how just kind of, I don't know, massive, like, I describe this style of Lanois production as, you know, if you're like, it's like you're watching the back roads of a state highway in like the Carolinas or something like that, but you're not watching them in real life. You're watching it in like IMAX. And because it doesn't feel real, it feels cinematic. It feels grander than what you see in real life. And yet it does feel authentic. It feels like you were seeing something truly real. So yeah, I think this is great. This is the only Emmylou album I've heard front to back, but I'm excited to get into her catalog a little bit more. So really cool to own that. Okay, speaking of Daniel Lanois, self-titled album from Robbie Robertson. I recently did an exploration of the entire discography of the band. I don't have any band records to show you here, but, you know, I did end up enjoying quite a few of them, after having only heard a couple before. But I also listened to the solo records. For the most part, I don't really care about the band's solo records. Personally, I thought the Rick Danko album was very mediocre. Think like late 70s Ringo Starr, and you have an idea of what Danko's solo album sounds like. The Garth Hudson one was weird. and most of Levon Helm's ones I didn't really care for. But Robertson to me is the glue. I know people hate on this guy because they think he's arrogant or whatever, and I'm not saying I don't understand it from everything that I've read, but I think it's very clear that this is the guy, that he's the fellow who is the glue, who is building the momentum, and who made them artistically ambitious in a way that is compelling and interesting. And I think that's super critical. I really like this album. I think, it's interesting to hear Robertson take center stage, especially as a vocalist, because he never does that in the band. He rarely ever sings. And he's got an effective voice. It's not traditionally great, but I think it works, especially for this Lanois produced style here that you hear. This one I think is a lot more comparable to like Oh Mercy by Dylan, if you're looking for a reference point. But also with kind of a grander, more massive production that fits more of like the U2 work and that sort of thing that Lanois was doing. There's definitely a commercial bent towards this that isn't there in the sort of Dylan related projects that Lanois does, which I think is what I'm talking about. So this one, it's not my absolute favorite Robertson solo album. My number one is Music for the Native Americans, I think is the official title, the one that he did for the PBS documentary. I think that one is really effective. I really like how Robertson in that era and later on will fuse elements of his own kind of re-exploration of his heritage, how he fuses that with the sounds that he was already gravitated towards, like blues and roots rock and that sort of thing. So that's probably my favorite one, but sadly that is not available on vinyl, so the self-titled will have to do. As will this one, Cinematic, his last record. And yeah, I think, I guess the downside you could say about Robertson's later career and his later solo albums is that they start getting into Eric Clapton territory. I can't remember the title of the record that comes before this, but the one that comes before this, I remember thinking, oh God, this sounds exactly like a fucking Eric Clapton solo album. And then like 2 tracks after I said that, Clapton appears as a guest soloist. So, there's that. If you're not a fan of solo Clapton, then you'll probably roll your eyes at some of this stuff. I'm hit or miss, but I do really like some stuff. And I think this record is a little bit less guilty of that. And I think showcases not just Robertson's skills as a guitarist, but his skills as an interpreter of these songs. I think the arrangements are cool. I think it sounds cool. And I think it's an effective, closing statement. I think if you want to call that a closing statement to his career, and then his work on the Killers of the Flower Moon soundtrack as like a postscript, an epilogue, I think that's a fair way of assessing it. Okay. So Bob Dylan, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about these records because I recently did a video ranking all my Bob Dylan albums, all the Bob Dylan albums. And you can get my more in-depth thoughts on them there. But I'm going to start with this one. That is Tempest. I really, once I saw Dylan in concert, I knew that I had to get this record. Because, of course, Tempest was the theme of that leg of his tour. Although he only played, I think, 1 song from it in the show that I saw. But, of course, Tempest was the theme of the merch that they were selling. That's the t-shirt that I got. So, very important to have this. Really great album. This is honestly a Dylan record that I have been playing on repeat pretty consistently since I saw him. And I think that, again, the voice in particular is the biggest hang up for people when talking about that album and late career Bob in general. Again, for me, I think with time, I kind of got more used to the sound of it. And with that acclamation, I just found myself really growing to appreciate the songwriting. I think the Tempest songwriting is some of his best of that era and potentially of his career. Really great. I needed to get some of these classic records that I didn't already own just because, like, I've been slacking on them. So here's Blonde on Blonde. Yeah, again, nothing much more to be said about it. The reputation is what it is for a reason. Kind of funny that they're advertising Rainy Day Women and I Want You on the front here, as if there aren't, like, certainly most of the tracks on there I would say are a lot more compelling and more widely lauded than Rainy Day Women, but you know, what can you do? Bringing it all back home. Again, my I won't spoil where it placed on the list, but it's a number that rhymes with 1. And yeah, wild to me that I did not own this one already, but I finally pulled the trigger and got it. And yeah, again, if you're looking for a Bob Dylan with vitality, who is just dipping his toes into the electric waters that are going to dominate the remainder of his career, and that are going to change the course of his career and, you know, make him much bigger than he ever was before. I mean, that is ground zero. That is where it starts. And boy, it is just so engaging to listen to. So great. Okay. A Bob adjacent project that I've also been wanting to get on vinyl for a long time. I guess it's not a Bob adjacent project because he's in the damn thing. The Traveling Wilburys, Volume 1. I like this album. I really like this album. I don't care. I know that some people hate the Traveling Wilburys. They think it is the dullest, most uninspired music known to mankind. And you are well within your right to have that opinion. From my standpoint, you know, it's a vanity project, yes, and it doesn't need to exist, but I am very glad that it does. There's nothing, like, to me, there's nothing objectionable about seeing 5 people, even if all these people are multi-millionaires. There's nothing objectionable for me to see these 5 guys just kind of jamming on rock and roll themes, musical themes that, in a lot of cases, they grew up with, and just having a blast. I think there's so many tracks on here that, you know, they might fall on a wider spectrum as far as, like, quote unquote objective quality, but even the silly tracks like Dirty World or whatever are just so entertaining and so engaging. And to me also just such an important statement, I think, for Roy Orbison especially. I think Mystery Girl, the album in and of itself, would have been a fine way for Orbison to close out his career, certainly a very elegant way. But I think this is really important as a complimentary piece, because this is not necessarily intended as the other 4 members of the Wilburys, you know, paying tribute to Orbison and saying how much he influenced them. That's not the goal of the project, but that's what it ends up serving as. And on tracks like Not Alone Anymore, I mean, you really get to see Orbison take over and just see everybody else kind of bow at his feet. If you haven't watched a documentary about the Wilburys, about the making of the record, highly suggest it. Highly worth watching it. Okay. Let's shift gears massively and talk about Taylor Swift. So I have been working my way towards trying to complete this collection. There was a period of time where some of her Big Machine records were just ridiculously expensive. You were paying like $60, $70 for some of them on vinyl. So a lot of these early records I just never had the chance to pick up. I picked up Fearless a few months ago, and I finally found the self-titled for a reasonable price. And yeah, it had to be for a reasonable price. I'm sorry, I can't really justify spending a ludicrous amount of money on this album in particular. Not that I dislike it. I like the album. It's certainly really good, especially considering what her age at the time. Songs like Tim McGraw and Teardrops on My Guitar are incredibly mature songs for a 16-year-old to be writing. But again, it doesn't, again, to me, I think this is a clear major step down in quality from pretty much everything else she made, and has made since then. I'm glad to own it. I'm glad to have it as a completist. But I did a video on another channel where I talked about my Taylor Swift rankings, and I'll probably do another video on this channel at some point to update my thoughts. But to me, I think that is probably the least compelling of her records. And then to another record where a lot of people would argue this is the least compelling of this band. And I might agree from an objective standpoint, but I've actually been really listening to this a lot lately. First Two Pages of Frankenstein by The National. This is the first of the two records that The National released last year. And this album got a lot of negative press when it came out. A lot of people remember the review from Anthony Fantano, who, as I'm recording this video, is getting a lot of flack from people for his Halsey review. And of course, the review of Fantano, I think it was a 2 out of 10 that he gave it, and the entire video is like 12 minutes of him sleeping, because he is obviously calling the record boring. And I get it. This is the most muted National album to date. There's not a whole lot in the way of dynamics. The song structures themselves are pretty static. There's a lot that, in theory, would turn me off of this record just in general, and kind of had for a while. But there was a period of time, something within the last couple of months, where I started listening to this album more, while driving especially. I've had to do a lot of driving in the last few months, and something about it, it works well, especially for those nighttime drives. And I can relate, just on a personal note, to the emotions being discussed here. The entire record is really a record about burnout, both from a just very literal standpoint as far as the circumstances of it being made, but also the lyrics, a lot of themes about like relationship tension and being exhausted in a relationship and not really knowing what the future looks like and that sort of thing. And I dig it. What can I say? It's grown on me. I don't know if I were to do a ranking again, which I'll probably do on this channel at some point. I don't know exactly where it would fall. I don't think it would be ridiculously high, but who knows? I do respect it. I do enjoy it a lot more than I thought I did. And The National, I think, is just continuing to rise in like my esteem as far as like bands that I can put on at any time and just thoroughly enjoy. All right. More Bob Dylan. We talked about Time Out of Mind earlier. Here it is. Superb album. As I said in the Dylan ranking video, I think the production is, the sound of it, again, that description that I used earlier, talking about how the record sounds like this back road that's being shown in like an IMAX theater or something like that. When I use that description, this is the album that I am talking about, because that is what this record sounds like. It is larger than life. It is massive, but man, the sounds that are being made, the themes that are being discussed, they feel like themes that you have seen. They feel like things that you have done or seen. And it really, it's cutting. It is really cutting. And the themes of mortality on here and the reflection that this record shows, especially in contrast with like everything else that Dylan had been doing in the late 80s and 90s up to that point. It's such a breath of fresh air in context, and even out of context, it shows, it reflects very well. It's extremely strong and really well worth your time checking out. I would say if you're someone who maybe is only familiar with like classic Dylan, as it were, the 60s and 70s records and that sort of thing, I think Time Out of Mind is your easiest entry point to his late career stuff. Go to Time Out of Mind, then go to probably Love and Theft. You might as well just hit those two up first, and then maybe Rough and Rowdy Ways is your next point, is your next stop at that point. then Tempest, or some sort of order like that. All right. I teased this at the very beginning of the video, but I wanted to talk, let's get this piece of tape off here. I wanted to talk about this record that I got in the mail. It's something I'm very, very excited about. As far as the best albums of 2024 to this point, that's a very tough conversation to have because there have been a lot of really terrific ones. But this one is certainly at or near the top for me, as it is for a lot of people. And that, of course, is Imaginal Disc by Magdalena Bay. And if you notice right here and right here, this is an autographed copy. Again, my friend who works at a record store in the Nashville area made myself and some other folks aware that this was a thing. They had some limited autographed copies. I took the plunge, purchased it for a very reasonable price, and yeah, and the rest is history. Such a good album, such a great album. You know, I know that we're kind of in an era right now where there's a lot of emphasis on, like, well, I mean, it's a stupid comment to say we live in an era that's defined by nostalgia, because every era is defined by nostalgia, but especially nostalgia, I think, for like the 70s, you know, the kind of Jessie Ware, like disco pop and stuff like that, that's become very popular in a post like random access memories world, and especially within the last few years. You know, this is not an uncommon style what Magdalena Bay is doing, but I think they are mixing it with this production that is, you know, taking, again, it's interesting, it's sparkling production, it's very bright. There's just these bursts of sounds that are not intuitive. Like this is what you mean when we talk about, like, this is what we mean when we talk about if you want to step back into a nostalgic sound or something, then figure out how to update it for the present day. This is a record that does that. This does not just live inside of the nostalgia and say, hey, remember when we made music like so-and-so? Like Silk Sonic is an example of a record that does that. And I think that's a great album, but, you know, it is very much like it sits back in that nostalgia and is comfortable just kind of staying in that zone. And Magdalena Bay is a record that will, you know, this album will go back and say, okay, let's experiment with this sound and let's just add something else to it on top of that. To make people understand that, no, this is not just the past, this could be the future as well. And you have that contrast that I think is just so engaging. And every single song here, I think, is distinct. I think they flow into each other really effectively. And even though I feel, if I remember correctly, this is like a 50-minute album, give or take. You know, it's a little bit longer than what most people would say is a comfortable listening experience, but does not feel that way at all to me. I think it's really, really good. And as I said, if it's not my favorite album of 2024, it's a shoe-in for top 5. And just, again, more and more of a sign that from an album standpoint, certainly, pop music and a lot of pop adjacent genres are having a really excellent year. I saw an interesting discussion point on another server that I'm in talking about how that point is maybe a bit overstated. And I'll disagree with that in the sense that I can understand people saying, well, actually, there's a lot of shit music that's coming out in 2024, or whatever the hell, or that this is disrespectful to 2023, 2022, when there was still a lot of great pop music that's coming out, just not necessarily as mainstream. I think that's a fair enough point, but I think you can also argue that the fact that we are in an era right now where mainstream pop acts are making full-length records, not just individual singles, but full-length records that are this compelling and this interesting and feel this forward-thinking. I think, to me, that is a sign of the healthiness of the genre, and a sign that that healthiness is pronounced in a way that it normally isn't. Not to the same extent anyways. So I understand wanting to like be mindful of hyperbole with some of these statements, but holy cow. I there's so many great front to back albums that have come out this year in the pop realm. That yeah. Anyways, let's talk about another 2024 album, but not in the pop realm at all. This is David Gilmour, Luck and Strange. I wasn't even sure if we would ever get another David Gilmour album. Rattle That Lock. I recently re-listened to his whole discography after this came out. And, Rattle That Lock, it was honestly like I didn't like it as much as I remembered. I love On an Island, his 2006 record, the first one that came out post Pink Floyd. But Rattle That Lock to me, I think just felt a little bit wispier from a songwriting standpoint. That record also just was trying to balance a lot. There's a few different like stylistic things he's trying to do that I couldn't quite invest myself in as a listener. And Luck and Strange has a little bit of that ambition for sure, but I found myself for the most part really enjoying the decisions that he's making. There's a very like family focused element to this record. His daughter, Romani, I believe that's how you pronounce their name, or Romani. But yeah, his daughter is on a couple of the tracks here. Between 2 points, she even sings. They even sing lead, and yeah, it's a record that is, talking about kind of familial themes and talking about aging and that sort of thing, but not in a way that feels heavy-handed. In part, again, because I think Gilmour has already explored those themes. I think On an Island talks about that to some extent. But I think, Gilmour's voice is, it's aged effectively for the most part. He still sounds pretty good for his age. I think there are times when I think the songs get a little bit too grandiose for their own good. I think that's a problem people had with songs like The Piper's Call, is there's not a whole lot of meat there for a song that is as bombastic as it is. But there are still moments, like especially the song Scattered, the closing track of the album proper. That track has the best Gilmour guitar solo I think that he's done in 30 years. On an Island has some great guitar solos, but Scattered is a classic, like, as far as the structure, as far as like the melodic arc of the guitar solo and how it works, like that is what I'm looking for in a Gilmour solo, that sort of gravitas, that melodic framing. So if you haven't checked the album out, again, is it a career highlight for Gilmour? I don't know, but I really liked it. I really, really liked it. And I think there's at least some songs there that are worth putting on repeat. And even the one with his daughter, I think, if you're not someone who listens to Gilmour regularly, if you're someone who doesn't really listen to that style of music, that's actually a good entry point, because if I heard that on the radio, I wouldn't peg that as a Gilmour song. I'd peg that as like a really nice kind of folk pop tune from this era. So I think that works. I think there's some crossover there. Okay, plugging away. The next record is from a band called Typhoon. This is Offerings. Typhoon is an indie rock band from Portland, Oregon. I first became like really familiar with it because a dear friend of mine kind of introduced me to them, one of their favorite bands. And I was like maybe slightly familiar with them beforehand. And for a while, this was actually my favorite record of theirs that I'd heard. It was the most recent one when I discovered them. I will say over time after hearing it, this has actually dropped quite a bit in my esteem. The entire album is like, the whole focus is based on, the theme of someone who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, basically, or diagnosed with dementia. And it's meant to be kind of a dramatic telling of kind of that story and the concerns that go along with it. And there's references to memory loss all through it. There's a song called Algernon, which is the reference to the book Flowers for Algernon, which I read years ago and thought it was extremely powerful. Highly recommended if you haven't read it. And, you know, when I first listened to this, there are not too many examples of a record growing off of me like this one did. Which you might ask why I have it on vinyl. I got it on vinyl because of the nostalgia element, and also because it's not that expensive. But I think this record grew off of me because I was really affected by the theme when I first heard it. But after listening to kind of their whole discography again relatively recently, this one just kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, both in terms of just where it's placed. I mean, I don't think there's any other Typhoon record that is as self-serious as this one. There's no other Typhoon record as long as this one. And there's no other Typhoon record that has just like songs that, meander, I guess. There are several songs here that are like crossing the 6, 7, 8 minute mark. And, I think without having read any sort of the sort of liner notes and things like that, I think it's another record where I question how much meat there is to the concept and the structure of these tracks, and how much of it is the band maybe getting caught up a little bit too much in their own pretensions. There's a really interesting review from the channel Spectrum Pulse that I remember watching around that time, where Mark Grondin, the critic, talks about that record and is pretty like negative on it. And at the time I remember thinking, man, what's he talking about? He's missing the mark. But I think as time goes on, I kind of see that it's just a little bit, I think he was on the mark pretty effectively. So there are other Typhoon records that I like a lot more than that one. I do think the cover of it is kind of cool. And we'll get to one actually later on in this video. But admittedly, that was a case of a record where I got it from nostalgia, and then I re-listened to it afterwards, and I was like, oh shit, I actually don't like this as much as I thought I did. Which doesn't happen too often. But again, it's an interesting experience when it does. So I guess I'm grateful for that. All right, we're coming in on the closing stretch here. Kit Sebastian, New Internationale. Kit Sebastian. So they are a group that I discovered in like late September, I think it was when the live stream happened. So they, so this was a band that I discovered from a Spectrum Pulse live stream, going through like, top Bandcamp tracks and that sort of thing. Bandwidth is the name of the live stream every Thursday evening. I'm plugging it because I think it's really cool. And really interesting if you're someone who struggles to stay on top of new, more independent releases. And, this act, they've released, I think, one or two other albums. Two other albums, if memory serves. So this is not their first release. They are from, there's kind of a whole mixture of like, themes of Turkish music and French music, Brazilian music as well. There's disco influences in here. The song Bull, 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 which is on the second side of this record, is, again, if we're talking like songs or songs of the year, like favorite songs of 2024, that song is a contender for number one for me. And for that matter, this record is a contender for number one as well. When I talked about the Magdalena Bay record earlier, I said there were maybe one or two others that could be in contention for that number one spot, and this is absolutely one of them. I think, as much as I don't think any of the songs here live up to the standards of Bull, 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 which is just so euphoric, so immersive, and just energetic, and the sense of dynamics is so good, I don't think any of the other songs are as effective, but that's such a lofty bar that that leaves room for like everything else to still be of extremely high quality, which it is. The fusion of influences here is very, it's diverse. It's not a record that is going to sound exactly like anything else that you've heard before, but especially for Western audiences, I should say. But I think for those Western audiences, it is going to sound enough like things you've heard before to where you still have a connection. Like you'll have a connection to it. This is not necessarily, you know, like I hate using the term, but the term world music, if you will, you know, to describe non-Western music. People have this preconception of like, oh, if it's not made in like the US or the UK, there's going to be this massive barrier to it. And I really don't think even those people who have those preconceptions, I don't think it'll be a concern here. I think there's enough connection with, you know, contemporary disco, even rock styles, pop sounds, that if you enjoy music made by Western artists in this style, you are going to probably enjoy this. I've recommended this to a few people now who have known nothing about Kit Sebastian, and they have across the board loved this. So if any of the records that I've talked about in this video you've not heard of before, chances are this is probably going to be one of them. Seek it out, pick it up, give it a listen on Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music, what have you. And if you enjoy it, do what I did, buy the vinyl, buy the CD on Bandcamp, and support the artist. Because that is certainly very important. All right. Getting to some less obscure territory now. This is The National again with High Violet. High Violet, one of my favorite National records. I think it is, you know, I like every National album for sure. Some more than others. I think they're, you know, once they get to their third record, Alligator, from then on, it's just kind of a barrage of high quality albums as far as I'm concerned. But High Violet, the stretch between High Violet through Sleep Well Beast is the peak for me. That whole stretch of records, where they start dipping into this even more dramatic, like sweeping territory in their soundscapes. Things become lusher. There's more of a reliance on strings and pianos in their sounds. And the writing, both the lyrical writing of Berninger and the musical beds that the Destiners make, I think are never better than they are on those three albums. So yeah, High Violet is very dramatic, and very grandiose. And I know some people say they don't love the production on the record, which I can understand that it's probably objectively flawed in some ways. But from my standpoint, I think the quality of the songs and the sound that they're going for transcends any quote unquote issues, like objective issues that you might see from the sound of it. I think every song on here is extremely excellent. But I think that the ones that most people know, tracks like Blood Buzz Ohio, Lemon World, Vanderlyle, Crybaby Geeks, that sort of thing. I think all of those are highlights to me, probably. So yeah, really great album. Kind of surprised it took me this long to get it on vinyl. It was one of those things where I tried to keep a lookout in stores for it and that sort of thing, and just never really ran across it, but ran across other National albums in the wild. So finally happy to be able to purchase that. Okay. Taylor Swift again finally acquired the Tortured Poets Department on vinyl. This is, I waited as long as I could to get this record on vinyl, in large part because I really wanted to see if they were going to do some sort of additional release with the anthology on vinyl. I believe I got this record the day after it was announced that the anthology was going to be released independently on vinyl, coming out in a few weeks at the time I'm recording this video as a Target exclusive thing. I'm definitely going to get it because some of the anthology tracks are some of my favorites on the album proper. But at that point, I was like, I mean, fuck it. I'm going to get this at this point because it's not dropping in price. And they're not going to release the two records side by side. I have complicated thoughts on the Tortured Poets Department. I do think it's great. I understand the critiques, and I think a lot of the critiques are valid. I just don't find myself caring about them because I think the sound of it is solid. I think it's well executed. I think even if the songwriting and the lyrics are getting into, they're getting caught up in themselves, certainly in a way that even a lot of other Taylor songs and albums can't manage. I think that, ultimately I still find myself engaged by the melodies, even during the times when I think she drops some huge lyrical clunkers, like on the title track. It's again, it's complicated because I don't know of a record where I agree with people's descriptions of what the flaws are, and yet don't really care about those flaws more than this one. I think it's consistently engaging. I think if you want to argue that it's not a step forward from Midnights, but feels like more of the same and retreading previous ground, again, I think it's a fair critique, but I also happen to really like the sound of Midnight, so I don't think that's a bad thing. But I'm happy to finally get it on vinyl, and I'm excited to get the anthology edition because, as I said, some of my favorite tracks on that whole double album, if you will, live on the anthology set. So excited about that. All right. Trampled by Turtles, Duluth. Usually there's a theme where like I'll get a record here that I have not actually heard in full before. And that is the case with Duluth here. I have heard one or two of these songs before, I'm pretty sure. I want to say November and Shenandoah. I think I've heard those before. But Trampled by Turtles are a band where I have heard individual songs. I've not sat down and listened to a full album. If you don't know who they are, by the way, Americana, country folk act from Minnesota, from the Duluth area, actually. And a band that I've heard a lot about for many, many years. I've known plenty of people who really enjoy their music. They play a lot of shows around here. I've yet to see them, but they're on my bucket list. So I picked up this record for two reasons. Number one, because it's I think it's technically the most acclaimed record of theirs. At least one of them. And number two, because I'm a huge fan of the city of Duluth, Minnesota. If you've never been, go check it out. Really cool port town right by the kind of western edge of Lake Superior. Right on the western edge of Lake Superior, I should say. Really beautiful, a lot of fun things to do. Really great place. So of course I had to have a record that had that name on it. I don't have thoughts on it because I haven't heard it, as I said, but I would like to do a deep dive on the Turtles one day. The real Turtles too. I'm sure they'd be interesting. But Trampled by Turtles in this case. Anyways, last Taylor Swift record, Speak Now. Finally got this one as well. I think this was the most egregiously expensive out of all of the T-Swift originals that I've been looking for. This was the one that was consistently I would have to spend $60, $70, $80 to get it. And I'm so happy that it looks like they repressed it or something. So I didn't have to spend that much money. Great album, an album that has consistently grown on me every time I've listened to it. The songwriting, I think, takes a huge step forward compared to the first couple of albums. And I think this is definitely, I think it's obviously the peak of her, country era, as it were, her country pop era, because once she gets to Red, I think I don't think you can really call that country pop anymore. It's country pop adjacent. But it's definitely its own thing at that point. But yeah, this is evidence that had she stayed in this sound, like if she had stayed exploring country music, I mean, some people think that she would never have topped this record if she had stayed in that sound, and maybe that's true, but I don't know. I think, if she had stayed in that area and focused her songwriting in that area, you do have to wonder what type of records we'd be getting. Not that I don't love the pop pivot that she's done. I think many of her best, all of her best albums to me are after that pop pivot, but a world where, T Swift is a contemporary, like a very direct contemporary of someone like, I don't know, Maren Morris, I guess, or Casey Musgraves. That to me, yeah, that's an interesting world for sure. I'd be very curious to see, especially if she jumps into just doing like a full blown country album at some point in the coming years. Like just goes right back to her roots, which seems distinctly possible with how popular country music is in the mainstream these days. So who knows? All right. 3 more, it looks like. Yeah. 3 more. Clairo, Charm. Her most recent record. I got this on CD actually a few months ago, before I'd even heard it, again, just to kind of take a chance. And then I listened to her entire back catalog, and I think she is an example of an artist who is consistently just getting better and improving over time. I think there are so many great songs on here. Everyone's talking about Juna as a song, and it's well deserved. I think it's such a fantastic kind of soft pop record. I like Sling, her most recent record. I like that one a lot, and I like her work with Jack Antonoff, but the fact that she switched producers on this album, I think, only serves to her benefit. I think this sound is more engaging. The band work is genuinely incredible on here. And, she doesn't necessarily seem like the type of person who would fit that sound super well, because I feel like a lot of people who start in that indie folk world don't necessarily have that versatility. That's not a diss necessarily. If you have your lane, you have your lane, but she would not have struck me as someone who could fit in this type of sound. But boy, does she. She fits it really well. And these kind of, slow burn, at times definitely kind of, sensual tracks, fit her to a T. It sounds great. It's engaging. And again, another argument for 2024 being a strong year. Considering, that record is one of, that's not even close to the most prevalent or most hyped pop album of this year. And I think it's still exceptionally high quality and definitely her best work to date. Brian Wilson and Van Dyke Parks, Orange Crate Instrumentals. As you can see, I got this for 40% off. That's kind of the only reason that I got it. So Brian Wilson and Van Dyke Parks released an album called Orange Crate Art in 1995. They re-released it a few years ago in 2020 on vinyl. And as part of Record Store Day, because I think they released it on Record Store Day or around that time, they also released this companion record that's just the instrumental versions of all the Orange Crate Art tracks. And I would see this thing at Record Store Day, at record stores and stuff like that, and I never pulled the trigger. I have the original album on vinyl that I've talked about in another video, but I never got this one. So 40% off of $22, so I got it for like $13 or something like that. It was an easy purchase to make, just to be completist. I have not heard the actual instrumentals of these, but Van Dyke Parks as an arranger, as an instrumental arranger, is always extremely engaging, and that is the I think definitely the high point of the Orange Crate Art album is the instrumental tracks and the soundscapes that he's sweeping, not necessarily the lyrics as much or Brian Wilson's vocals. So I think it's a smart decision to release the instrumentals originally, like isolated on their own. And I'm excited to check them out at some point. Okay. And then the last record that I have to talk about is going to be another record by Typhoon. This is White Lighter. This is the 10th anniversary edition, which you can get on their Bandcamp, because this record turned 10 years old last year, I think. So alternative cover. The original cover is more like orange, red, and black, and a different colored vinyl as well. White Lighter is... So that was I think their second proper full-length album. And I liked this one as well when I first heard it. And this is the one that, unlike Offerings, which has grown off of me over time, this one has grown on me. And I would now say this is definitely my favorite that they have done. This is a very, I think Typhoon is a band that has pretensions for across the board for sure. I don't think that's isolated to Offerings. I think you hear it here. One thing to note is that this is a massive band. This is not like a 4-piece or a 5-piece act. I'm looking at the back cover right now, and there are 12 people on the back cover. This is a huge outfit with like string players and horn players, and, multiple, lead vocalists. So, there's a lot of areas where they can lean into their excess and they can lean into these just kind of massive sounds. And they really lean into it on this record. If you're looking for, if you're going into this expecting a fairly bog standard indie rock or indie pop affair, that's not what you're going to get. There are weird time signatures all over this thing. There are weird, little instrumental breaks. I swear, half the songs have multiple, massive structural changes in them. Where they go from a really loud section to a really soft section that might be in a completely different meter. Different lead vocalist might be added into it at some point. There's so much going on that it becomes very difficult to keep track of. And I think that's part of why this record has grown on me, is because it is bouncing around. It throws you from place to place. And I have not done a super huge deep dive into the lyrics or anything like that. I think there's a lot of themes about discontent, about trauma, about kind of existential thinking and things like that. The lead singer, Kyle Morton, is someone who's very from what I understand, very open about those types of things. And so, I think this is a record where if you check it out and you are maybe overwhelmed by it kind of the first time, or think of it just as pretentious, I wouldn't necessarily blame you if you thought that, but I will say give it a chance, give it a try, come back to it periodically. I think as time goes on, and especially once you start buying into what the singer and what the artists are selling you a little bit, you will find something worth really enjoying here. I think as it stands, this is probably in contention for being one of my favorite albums of 2013. And it was not that way initially. It's definitely grown on me quite a bit. I admire the diversity. I admire the themes on here. I admire the playing. I think you have to keep up with all these instrumental changes and these signature changes and all that sort of thing. That takes some really great players to do that. And I think they step up to the challenge here. So check it out. Really great. The record that came out after Offerings is also really good. That's a lot more stripped back. So I can't remember the name of that one off the top of my head, but check that one out too. And then again, if you want to check out Offerings, go for it. Just understand that one is dense. And that's one where, again, I have struggled to kind of crack that one as much as I would like. But I might have a moment of renewal with it yet. We'll have to see. Okay, that is all the records. I've no idea how long we've been going at this point, probably for at least an hour, if not more than that. So thank you all for bearing with me. Thank you all for sticking with this. I hope this is enjoyable. I hope being able to talk about these records, it gives you some sort of kick, gives you some sort of validation, like, hey, he likes these records too. If it gives you inspiration to buy some of these on vinyl for yourself, fantastic. Either way, I would love to know what you think about any of these records, all of these records, in the comments below. And yeah, if you own any of these on vinyl, CD, physical media, or whatever, I'd love to hear about that too. Thanks so much. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews, more collection videos like these, all of those are and will continue to come down the pipeline. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications, and then tell a friend as well. Word of mouth is really helpful. Spread the word about the channel, spread the word about Creative Works. It's the best way to help those things flourish and to help nurture them. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. Bye now.